The election spend-a-thon steps up a gear as both parties roll out the big guns for their official campaign launches today. Peter Dutton is offering to splash $10 billion on a one-off tax cut. Anthony Albanese is promising $10 billion to help first home buyers into the housing market. I'm David Spears. Welcome to Insiders. The budget may be in deficit, but that's not stopping the two sides of politics loading up some big spending promises today. At the coalition campaign launch in Sydney, the opposition leader will offer a one-off tax break to low and middle income workers. The price tag, $10 billion. At the Labor launch in Perth, the Prime Minister is also rolling out a $10 billion pledge. This one, however, is aimed at helping young Australians into the housing market. Money in the pocket or help to achieve the great Australian dream. The launches come ahead of a critical week of campaigning before the Easter break and the start of early voting. Donald Trump, meanwhile, continues to overshadow much of the campaign. A wild week of on-again, off-again tariffs and a rollercoaster ride on the markets ended with the US and China ratcheting up trade penalties on each other. Australia is amongst those caught in the crossfire.
Righto, what do you think?
You got five for the Prime Minister, buddy?
Oh, that was a cool one.
Season 2 of The Apprentice, White House edition, is off to a hot start.
The markets, still spooked by President Trump's tariffs, took investors on a wild ride.
But sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
A market meltdown here.
$162 billion was wiped off our share market in the blink of an eye.
The tariff turmoil rippled through the election campaign.
We're going into a very uncertain period.
Well, we live in uncertain times.
We don't know what the United States will do next.
It's bad news for your superannuation.
A potential silver lining for those with a mortgage.
The market is certainly now expecting multiple interest rate cuts.
The looming threat of a global recession is casting a big shadow on the election campaign.
Can you explicitly rule out a recession?
Look, we have, as a government, continued to see the economy grow.
Is Australia heading into recession? Well, it is under Labor.
Fair deals for everybody. Negotiate deals with us. They're dying to make a deal. We're going to have surpluses.
We have a trade surplus with Australia.
You don't negotiate like I negotiate.
Why were they whacked with a tariff?
Good on him. I like the cut of his jib.
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass.
Don't rub it in.
How do we know that you'll actually be negotiating a better deal and not just kissing his backside?
Tim, my job as Prime Minister will be to stand up for our country.
That we can make Australia great again.
After a week of market turmoil,
President Trump has announced that there will be a 90-day pause.
They were getting yippee, you know?
The Dow right now shooting up over 2,000 points. Look at that as this announcement comes through.
I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate.
This trade war with China shows no sign of ending yet.
US tariffs against China add up to 145%.
Beijing is hiking its retaliatory tariffs.
Australia is caught in the middle.
An offer from China to team up in a new approach to world trade.
We will speak for ourselves.
We have to stand up for our interests.
We stand on our own 2 feet.
What happens with China? We would love to be able to work a deal.
Where's Albanese?
There's nowhere to be seen.
Oh, come on.
You win it, mate, hands down.
Thank you.
I hope you win.
Thank you, mate, very much. Thank you.
And a reminder, we're running extended 90-minute editions through the campaign. My guests this morning are the Housing Minister, Clare O'Neil, and the Independent Member for Kooyong, Monique Ryan. First, let's check what's making news. And the two big campaign launch announcements are dominating the headlines. Peter Dutton's promising to give more than 10 million voters a one-off tax cut of up to $1,200. It'll cost the budget $10 billion on top of the $6 billion promise to cut fuel excise. It's aimed squarely at struggling families in the suburbs. Labor, meanwhile, hoping to win over young families with its housing pitch. First home buyers would only need a 5% deposit. The government would directly enter the private market as well, investing $10 billion to help build 100,000 new homes. We'll hear from the Housing Minister on all that shortly. And finally, the Shadow Minister for Government Efficiency has vowed to make Australia great again. Labor pounced on the comment, but Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price says she was not making an ode to Donald Trump. Well, let's check in now with our correspondents covering the two campaign launches happening today. Jacob Greber is at the Coalition campaign launch in Sydney, and Jane Norman is in Perth, where Labor will be holding its campaign launch. Jacob, I want to go to you first, and you've just got some breaking news on something else that the Coalition's going to be announcing today at the campaign launch. But let's just get, firstly, an explanation on the tax cut that Peter Dutton is going to be promising.
So as you said, David, that's up to $1,200. This goes to, in various forms, about half of all taxpayers if a coalition government is elected. This is bringing back what used to be known as the low and middle income tax offset, or LMITO, as people used to call it. That was introduced by the Morrison government as a way to get more support to lower and middle income households. It was always time bounded. Labor did not renew that particular measure. And Peter Dutton is promising that if he is elected in May, that he will bring that back. That money will flow to households, David, as a lump sum in the middle of next year. It's very much a cost of living type measure. It'll come into force. People will see it in their bank accounts about the same time as the fuel excise cut that he's also promised rolls off.
All right, and to your scoop, I think the story's just gone online on ABC News, Jacob. Peter Dutton hasn't leaked this one out, but you've got the details on the big announcement he'll be making today.
So this is very much countering Labor's own housing announcements that Jane will go through in a moment. We've been hearing for some time now that the Coalition has something big up their sleeve on housing. They've been telling people will want to vote for a coalition government rather than a Labor government if they're buying a house. Now, my understanding is this announcement includes introducing tax deductibility for mortgage interest payments. That will make the average first-time home buyer, and that's critical. They must be a first-time buyer, and also very critical, they must be buying a new constructed home. Right. So that'll help the supply from the Coalition's point of view. That's their argument for how that'll work. But it's a benefit on average to an average household of about $11,000 a year. It goes for 5 years, so that's up to $55,000. So you can deduct the interest on the first $650,000 of your mortgage. That's my understanding of what they'll be announcing later today.
Yeah, that's a big move. I know this has sort of been whispered for some weeks, but they're important, I guess, restrictions on it that you went through there. It has to be a newly built home, and it's only for a first home buyer for the first 5 years they can make that deduction. Do we know yet, Jacob, what that might cost the budget?
No full sense yet on the cost. We'll have to wait and see on that. There will be questions asked about what this means for the overall tax system. This type of measure is common in a lot of other countries. But in those countries, the government tends not to give you a big capital gains freebie. They will claim some of the upside when you sell your house down the line. Now, there's no mention of that, but that is the sort of trade-off that other countries have made. So it's a major structural shift if this is what the Coalition takes to the election and indeed wins.
Very interesting. Jane, let me get your take on the Labor side of the continent over in Perth there. Housing, the big focus for Labor there today. What can you tell us about this policy?
Yeah, that's right, Spearsy. No doubt that housing is a red-hot issue at this election, with Labor unveiling its rival policy today. So there are two elements to it. The first is that Labor is promising to spend $10 billion to build 100,000 new homes for first home buyers exclusively. It's a brand new scheme. The federal government would issue grants and zero-interest loans to developers to get these houses built, and the idea would be that those homes would be at the lower end of the price scale. The other element of today's announcement is about making it easier to buy. So the government will massively expand the first home guarantee scheme. Under this program, the government goes guarantor, so it allows first home buyers to get into the market with just a 5% deposit and allowing them also to avoid costly mortgage insurance. At the moment, this scheme is capped. Those caps will be removed and this scheme made available to all first home buyers. Spearsy, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions today about what impact these schemes will have on house prices, on demand, and when these 100,000 homes will actually be built. But clearly, this is aimed directly at those Gen Z and millennials voters who are currently locked out of the market.
We'll get to those questions with Clare O'Neil shortly. Jane, you're there in Perth. It's no mistake why Labor's gone back there to WA. This is the second time they've held a campaign launch there. How's it looking on the ground in WA?
Yeah, well, I think Anthony Albanese feels somewhat indebted to Western Australia for delivering him a majority government at the 2022 election. Now, Labor currently holds 9 of 16 seats here, and I've spoken to lots of Labor MPs, and they're feeling pretty good, Spearsy, about holding on to all of them. And in fact, in recent days, there seems to be some optimism growing that they might even manage to pick up the brand new seat of Bullwinkle. It's going to be tough. It's a three-cornered contest, but Labor is sensing some positive signs there, and it really speaks to the strength of the Labor brand in the West. Last month, we saw the WA Labor government convincingly re-elected. That state campaign is basically rolled straight into the federal campaign, so it's a well-oiled and well-resourced machine. We know that these launches are all about the optics, and very clearly, the government likes what it sees here.
Yep, and Jane, good to see you in your hometown as well. Thank you both, and we'll hear a lot more from you throughout the day as we cover these campaign launches on ABC News. Let's bring in our panel now. Let's talk to Patricia Karvelas, James Massola and Michael Stutchbury. Good to see you all this morning. Gee, it feels like a big day of campaigning today, the launches and some very big policy announcements. PK, these are potentially campaign shifting announcements. We'll get to each of them, but what's your take on what we just heard there from Jacob in particular about the surprise announcement today on housing?
Look, what I can tell you is that the Coalition has been trying to construct what they consider to be a game-changing policy on housing that makes everyone go, what? What is that? Not something incremental, but something that is radical in many ways. Now, a couple of weeks ago, in fact, it was on Politics Now, I said it to you, we were doing the podcast together, I said to you, I think they're looking at tax deductibility of mortgages. It appears I was correct. Michael Sukkar has been trying to get this proposal up. But it is really radical, this idea, and I'm intrigued about how much it will cost the budget bottom line. It will be, in my view, quite big. The reason that it was only ticked off, as I understand it, I've just actually confirmed this, really in the last couple of days, is because of its high cost. But Michael Sukkar, who's the Housing Minister, has been gung-ho trying to land this. They believe that Gen Z millennials are such a huge voting bloc here. They're not listening to Labor's messages about housing. They don't feel like they shift the dial, and what they're trying to do is get attention. Their campaign has been struggling for attention. They haven't had the traction. Housing is adjacent to cost of living as the biggest issue for voters, and they needed to do something huge to shift the dynamics of this campaign.
I guess limiting it to newly constructed homes and limiting it to 5 years of interest deductions brings down the cost from something more blanket than that, James, but it will grab attention.
Yeah, look, it sure will. And if there was any doubt, David, that we are in the midst of an election campaign, let that doubt be erased today. I think we've probably seen the three biggest spending policies, or certainly the biggest headline-grabbing policies today. Now, like Patricia, I think like a lot of us, we'd been hearing that this was something that the Coalition was working on. I had a member of the Shadow Cabinet just a few days ago say, no, look, we looked at it, there's no way, we'd love to do it, it's never going to happen.
They misled you.
Indeed. Who could believe that a politician would do that? Look, this will definitely get a significant amount of attention. I think it will take away from what Labor's announcing today for first home buyers. And I think if anything's going to kickstart the Coalition's campaign, which has been pretty slow to get going so far, this is it.
Well, it's interesting if this was a very late decision, right, to go down this big spending path. So too, it seems, was the tax cut that Peter Dutton's going to be announcing today, the one-off return of this tax break for low and middle income earners. Because only a couple of weeks ago, he delivered his budget reply, and he sat down with Sarah Ferguson on 7:30 that night, and here's what he said.
Can you confirm that there'll be nothing further offered on income tax cuts during the election campaign?
Well, Sarah, I'd love to introduce tax reform and tax cuts, but the Labor Party has racked up What we now see in the budget papers of about $1.2 trillion of debt. So we have to be realistic.
So that's an absolute no for the campaign.
We have a great desire at some stage when we clean up Labor's mess, but we won't be able to provide tax cuts during this campaign.
Stutch, that was so 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? What's happened since then?
Old news.
Well, I think what you're seeing is Australia has had a cost of living squeeze. It's now facing a decade of deficits, $1.2 trillion of deficit of debt, but neither side really wants to talk about how to fix that. So we've ended up, and the opposition has gone on, we're going to cut spending. That's gone over badly with the electorate. The electorate doesn't want to hear about spending cuts, so instead we've now got this auction of handing out money. The mortgage deduction thing, it applies.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, it applies famously in the US, and as Jacob said, the trade-off there a little bit is there's a capital gains tax that hits the family home, which doesn't apply here. But it's very bad tax policy.
Why is that?
Because it's narrow. There's no particular reason why you should get a deduction for your house. It's narrowing the tax base, and you should be spending money. We'll have to borrow. This is borrowed money that other taxpayers will have to pay for at some stage, and you're just narrowing the tax base and making it harder to get genuine tax reform, which goes to sharpening the incentives to growing a bigger economy so we can pay down this debt. This is very much targeted at the cost of living squeeze that has come particularly on housing, so they brought this out.
But does it not help young families get into the housing market? That's a worthwhile objective.
It may do, but it's another one. It's like one of these first home owners grants on steroids.
It's going to pump up demand.
It's a demand side measure.
So this will push up new house prices.
It can only do that because it's a demand side measure, and the main problem with housing is on the supply side. That's proving very hard to build enough houses in the current environment.
I've been talking to Saul Les, like the independent economist, about this because I was pursuing this story for a couple of weeks. He's just emailed me to say this is a candidate for the dumbest policy decision of the 21st century, rivaling the WA GST deal. It will allow those eligible for it to take out bigger mortgages than they otherwise would, and basically will push up house prices, which is what you were saying, Stutch. It's kind of economics 101, really. I mean, not that Saul is beyond 101, but he certainly says that. Can I say, though, he says Labor's policy of guaranteeing the deposits, which is the rival policy today, will have a similar effect.
Yeah, I was going to say, doesn't if it's a Labor, so the first home buyers guarantee has been there for a while, but it's limited to up to 50,000 places a year at the moment. For first home buyers can only need a 5% deposit. Government will guarantee the next 15%, makes it easier to get your loan and get underway. Now they're saying, it's available for all comers, but I think they're expecting it'll only increase to around 80,000 people a year that are going to take up the offer.
Just on the point,
and the price, the house price limit is gone as well. Oh no, is increased as well.
Yeah. On the point that Peter Dutton made to Sarah Ferguson there, I guess technically you could say he wasn't misleading to say that they didn't have tax reform on the agenda, because you can draw a line or you can link these three big policies together: the fuel excise cut, the the deduction for mortgages, and the temporary tax cut. None of these are actual reforms, David. These are short-term sugar hits to help the coalition, or help keep the coalition in the game during the election.
They would say targeted and temporary, James, wouldn't they? To avoid a long run,
bullet wound, maybe
a long run damage to the budget bottom line. At least it's only for 1 year. The tax
temporary, but you've still got to borrow the money. It increases your debt, and that'll increase your interest payments, which is now one of the fastest growing items of government expenditure. Is paying
sequence
off
though, isn't it? Stutch, like it's sequence.
Petrol cut.
You get it. It runs out,
then you get your tax cut.
The
tax cut. The interest deduction on your home, though, I think is going to be an ongoing.
5 years?
Yes, but an ongoing policy. So someone can deduct for 5 years their interest payments. But
good luck rolling that back.
Look, we'll see more.
That would be a very bad thing if it was entrenched in the Australian tax system. That would be a very bad thing, because it would go against the whole. None of the Henry Tax Review suggests any of this. None of the tax reformers suggest anything like this. So it is a purely political thing. So it is a very bad thing if we start going backwards.
I'm getting the vibe you're not a fan of this idea.
But the economics are definitely problematic. That's clear. But back to the raw politics.
Yeah, what are the politics like?
Well, the politics are just so blatant, which is why they've announced it. Their campaign has been struggling. They haven't had a proper narrative. in recent days, we've seen, Peter Dutton at the petrol bowsers. I think they're smart images for him. I do think that policy is popular. And this is another populist policy. If you're in a millennial or Gen Z, who are the majority of the voters now, and you can't get into the market, and then you hear that your mortgage repayments might be tax deductible, I mean, that's pretty appealing. Will you say, I wonder what Saul Eslake thinks of this policy? Maybe for the 5 wonks that are interested. Everyone else will think it's pretty appealing.
You think so, James?
Yeah, $55,000 tax deduction over 5 years. Who's going to say no to that?
So where does this play most strongly for them? Is it in those target seats we're talking about out of Melbourne, out of Sydney, where prices are through the roof?
That's right. That's exactly where this is targeted. So both of Peter Dutton's policies, which are sugar hits, I think, like they are, and then this additional one on housing, are very actually well tailored to this mortgage belt, the outer fringe. I mean, I spent Friday in McEwen, the seat of McEwen, on the urban fringe. In places like that, these policies, they are noticed, they do have cut through, and that's what it's about. So they're a lot more structured.
What about those who've recently bought a house, though? We may or may not have a couple in the office here who'd be thinking, hang on a minute, I'm not getting a cent out of this, but they'll be bankrolling it.
Yeah. And I don't think any of us on the couch are going to get the low-income tax offset, the what they call the Lamington, either, because it cuts out. So that, at least that is sort of targeted one-off. But again, that is not a tax reform thing. It's something that Scott Morrison brought in 2018. He's kept it going for 5 years, and now it's gone. The problem is, once you bring it in for a year, then taking it off again is the hard thing, because it means people can say, well, you're giving me a tax increase. That's the hard part once you put it.
Well, Jim Chalmers has worn that pain too. Now we're bringing it back.
And it's because that came to an end on Labor's watch. It was always scheduled to come to an end. That allowed the coalition to attack Labor forever after for seeing tax rates go up.
Things ending.
Standard of living's going down.
Is never a great moment. But I think, to be fair to Labor, their policy today, because there's the competing housing policies, and look, I can't believe they've all waited so long, can I say? This is the biggest issue for voters. I think they've left it a bit late. What are we, a week before pre-polling? But OK.
Maybe, we'll see.
Reach and repeat. We'll hear a lot of repeating of these messages. But Labor is offering, as we were talking about, these new houses, which Clare O'Neil will talk to you about, being offered just to first home buyers. That is a supply answer. And there has to be more of a supply answer, I think, from the coalition too, because a lot of their measures have been demand-side measures, and I think we still have the supply is the issue.
Labor has the advantage of being in government there on supply, though, I think, Patricia, where you can actually talk to the states, because the states hold so many of those levers in terms of land supply, land release, those sorts of issues. So it is probably a bit easier for Labor to have done this supply measure in government.
And I think the coalition has got some infrastructure spending for that's their supply measure, that out in blocks where there's no sewerage and the sort of thing, that they'll put more money into building that. I think that's their
what Gough Whitlam did in 73,
Having said that, I went to the suburb of Beveridge and McEwen on Friday. These people, there's no train, you can barely get out of your suburb. I mean, we better start having a proper conversation about how we're building these suburbs, because we are we're trapping people, and it is absolutely unsatisfactory to be building places like this.
All right, we'll come back to that. We'll talk to the Housing Minister, Clare O'Neil, now, and to take us there. He was the Coalition's campaign spokesman, James Patterson, on Sky News this morning, reacting to Labor's new housing plan.
Their Housing Australia Future Fund hasn't delivered one new home, despite promising to do so. And it was reported yesterday will need a taxpayer-funded bailout just to stay solvent. I mean, this is how bad things have got on this government's watch. They've said over 5 years they're going to build 1.2 million homes, but independent industry estimates are very clear they'll fall around 400,000 homes short of that. So no Australian should have any confidence that this government is going to do any better in its second term on housing affordability than it has in its first term.
Clare O'Neil, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David. So great to be with you.
So we've got competing housing plans today. I'll get your thoughts on what the Coalition's offering, but let's start with your plan. Just explain to us what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, thanks, David. So we've got a housing crisis in our country that's been a generation in the making, and this is today a life-defining issue for literally millions of people who live in our country. We came to government 3 years ago after a decade of complete neglect of this problem. Remember that for most of the time the Liberals were in office, they didn't even have a housing minister. And we've built from those ashes the most bold and ambitious Australian government housing policy that we've seen since the Second World War. Anthony Albanese will announce today that in a second term, our government will go further on housing, much further. And we're going to do that by introducing 2 game-changing measures that are focused completely on trying to back young people to get into a home of their own. The first is that for the first time in Australian history, the Commonwealth will partner with the states to build 100,000 homes exclusively to sell to first home buyers. So those first home buyers won't be competing with property investors or people of other generations. It's just their direct shot at owning a home of their own. But we know that we don't want young people around this country waiting for us to build our way out of this crisis. So we're also offering meaningful short-term relief by saying to every young person in the country, our government will back you to get into a home of your own with a deposit of just 5%. And this is all about offering that generation the opportunity to be paying off their own mortgage, not someone else's.
So I'll come to the housing supply, the 100,000 new homes for first home buyers, but on the demand side, I suppose, making this deposit guarantee more widely available to all first home buyers. It's currently, I think, available for $50,000 a year, but not all of those places are taken up, I think. So how many will now take it up, do you expect?
So we've got a scheme where we've increased the size from about 10,000 a year up to 50,000 a year. The Treasury estimates tell us that this might increase to about 80,000 homes a year. And I really want to make your viewers understand the impact of this. One of the things I worry about in the housing conversation is that the older generations are not hearing the level of distress that young people around our country are in. We've got a generation of young people who are putting off the decision to have children or deciding not to undertake further study or working in jobs that aren't right for them just because they can't get into stable housing. This policy reduces the amount of time it takes a young couple to save for a deposit from between 10 and 11 years all the way back to 2 to 3 years.
So if you have more buyers, and the estimate's around 80,000 a year, is that going to push up demand, push up house prices?
Well, look, the proof is in the pudding there, David. This is a scheme that's already in operation and it's proven to work. We've gone from 10,000 homes a year to 50,000 homes a year under this scheme with no discernible impact on prices. So if I can just help you understand why that's the case. The scheme doesn't allow people to take on more borrowings. The serviceability requirements that the bank will put on you are exactly the same. So when we've seen sort of similar schemes modelled, the Help to Buy scheme, for example, another of our policies will bring an additional 10,000 people into the market each year. The Grattan Institute has modelled the price impact of that to be $137 on a $700,000 mortgage. So these are the kind of numbers that we're talking about. And I just say to you, it's time for the Australian government to step up and back in this young generation.
All right.
Their housing opportunities are very different from anything
we'll
that's
get to their
gone
plans, but just to be clear, is the Treasury modelling on this idea that it won't impact house prices?
It won't have a significant impact on house prices.
Not a significant impact.
That's
is that
correct.
A small impact?
It's not a significant impact on house prices for the reasons that I've just explained. Just understand, David, that we have 700,000 property transactions happening in Australia each year. We're talking about a pretty narrow band of new first home buyers in the market. And David, can I just say, we want more first home buyers in the market. If we're not willing to accept that, then we're saying basically we're not going to do anything to help these young people and our government won't tolerate that.
So the other part of what you're doing today, and this is I think the more significant part really, on the supply side, $10 billion to build 100,000 new homes exclusively for first home buyers. Is this spending from the budget bottom line, or is this a new off-budget scheme that you're going to set up?
Yeah, it's not an off-budget scheme. This is money that will come directly out of the budget. It's $2 billion in grants and then $8 billion where we will either deliver zero interest loans to the states or we will take equity stakes in new projects. Now, again, we're building on something that's working really well here. In South Australia, for example, Renewal SA undertakes these type of developments. What's missing from the state development agencies is the capital flow. And we are going to put $10 billion into this project because we want to give young people a direct shot at home ownership. The big issue we have with supply at the moment, we've got an overall problem with supply, but the biggest problem is at the entry-level end of the market, and that's where we'll be intervening to bring that additional supply online.
How long will it take to get those 100,000 homes?
It's an 8-year program. We will, day one, if our government is re-elected, we'll sit down with the states and start to map out where these projects will be built. They'll involve state, local and federal land. They'll involve some private developers and some state agencies. we will start turning sods on these developments in the 26-7 financial year, and then first homeowners moving in the year after.
So it is going to take a while.
Well, building new homes takes time, David.
Okay.
The average time to build an apartment building in this country is 3 years. If I could, our government's doing a lot to truncate those timelines, but it is the reality of the situation. Now, that doesn't take away from the importance of building supply. We have a housing crisis in this country because for 40 years we've not been building enough homes, and our government is stepping up and doing something very meaningful and genuine about building that supply back up.
Okay, so the government will take equity, you said. Government's getting into the private property development market, essentially. This is not something we've seen. Well, have we ever seen this before?
Not of this nature. I mean, you've had Commonwealth and state governments building en masse housing, that's public housing for affordable rentals. We're talking about something quite different here. It is an article of faith in the Labor Party that ordinary people in our country should be able to have the opportunity to own their own home. So that's not always possible in Australia today.
So the government becoming a private property developer, does that mean you're competing against the private market? If the government's involved in a project on one side of the street and there's a commercial development going across the other side of the street, are you in competition?
Well, the housing that we most need right now in Australia is not getting built. So we're not competing. That the housing that's being built today is not affordable for most young people who are entering the market, and that's the real problem. What we're doing is supplementing supply at the affordable end of the market, and that's where it's really needed.
But why isn't the private market able to provide this housing?
Yeah,
What's the problem?
It's a really important question that just goes to the economics of what's going on in housing at the moment. The fundamental problem we have is that the cost of building is too high, and it can't be met by people who are borrowing money and buying homes. Now, the Liberal approach is just to stand back and say, oh, that's the operation of the private market.
Sorry,
we can't get into that.
We will get to the Liberal approach. But if the problem is the cost of construction is too high, how will the government-built homes be cheaper?
Well, lots of different ways. One of them is that we've got access to land that's available from state, local and federal government. We can also ask the states to do things like significantly truncate the timelines. So
can't you do that anyway? Why aren't you doing that already?
In renewal SA projects, for example, they can shave a year off just the development process. We're making, massive investment in skills and other things to make these projects cheaper. And then, of course, there'll be an impact where we're subsidising some of the cost of housing.
But why are you doing these things with the states already?
David, can I just clarify with you? The alternative to doing this is that we're not going to be building the housing that we need as a country. I mean, you're asking me very appropriate questions here, but just understand that if government goes back to the way of the Liberals, has the hands-off approach where we're not going to have anything to do with this problem, the housing crisis is going to get worse. This is our pathway to make a differes to this market.
I've heard that point, and we will get to the Liberals. But why aren't you telling the states to fix these things already? Why does the government need to be in the private market building homes?
Because look at the result when we're not rolling up our sleeves and getting involved. We've got a 40-year problem here where our country has not been, number one, building enough homes, but importantly, building homes at affordable prices that new entrants can afford. The only answer to this problem is for the government to actually get bloody active on this.
Okay,
and, to watch an Australian government with such neglect, not even have a housing minister for 6 years, well, the result, of course, is that all the affordability metrics got worse. Our government is going to roll up its sleeves and get involved. That is the only answer for the housing crisis confronting our country.
So will these government-built homes be more affordable? Will they be cheaper than what the private sector is building?
Yes.
How much cheaper?
Well, we need to negotiate this on a state-by-state basis, but in the South Australian example, we're building homes at that affordable entry level of the market, somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000. And, it's pretty hard to find new affordable housing at that price in most parts of the country right now.
Clearly everyone's going to want the cheaper government-built house than the more expensive private market-built house or apartment. So who gets to buy the cheaper government-built house? There's about 110,000 first home buyers a year at the moment. You're saying you'll have 100,000 over 8 years of these government-built homes. Who gets them?
Well, the eligibility criteria will be these are available to Australian citizens, they're available to first homeowners only, and they'll be for people who are going to live in their homes, not use them as an investment property. We'll negotiate state-by-state criteria that's appropriate for those different markets. Income levels are very different from state to state.
So they will be income tested?
In all likelihood, they'll be income tested. In South Australia, for example, they've got income caps that are around 115,000 for singles and a bit higher for couples.
So this will be lower income earners only, low and middle income earners?
We're targeting people who are not otherwise going to have an opportunity for first home ownership. And that's what I think people expect of the Australian government. We need to support people. 2 generations ago in this country, an ordinary working family could afford to get into home ownership and give their children the safety and security and stability that they deserve. And that's not always possible today, and that's where we're intervening.
That we've seen plenty of building companies collapse over recent years. If you now have the government coming into the private market as a builder, a project developer, is there a risk that other building companies are going to go, well, hang on, we can't compete with that. You're offering cheaper construction and got the deals with the states to get all this on the market much cheaper than them. Are we going to lead to more building company collapses?
Well, we'll be leaning on those building companies to help us build the homes, David. We're not going to start an Australian government building company to build these houses. Right. We're going to be building partnerships with state governments and with private developers to support them to build the stock that's desperately needed around our country. Okay. And I'll say to you again, the alternative to the government rolling up its sleeves and engaging on this is to do nothing at all about the supply problem. That's what the Liberals are offering, and that is a pathway and a road to a worsening housing crisis in this country.
And just one more on your policy before we get to the Liberal one. The skilled workers, we know the industry's crying out for skilled workers, can't find enough. This is one of the big problems. Where are they going to come from under your plan? Are you willing to bring more into the country?
Well, it's a really important point, David. And, we arrived in government not just to find a, pretty terrible housing crisis, but also a dearth of skills in our country after a decade of underinvestment. One of the biggest things our government is doing about this is fee-free TAFE. 500,000 Australians have bettered themselves and their communities through fee-free TAFE. 40,000 of those have been in construction workers. We've also got a program to make sure that construction-based apprentices are doing their apprenticeships in residential construction. And of course, you mentioned the migration system there. Look, we need to pull every lever that we have here.
So bring more in?
We have a 40-year-old housing crisis in this country because there's lots of things going wrong at the same time. And I hope what you see as a commentator here is that our government is deadly serious about this. We have tackled this problem from every angle, and now we're adding these really game-changing new dimensions, just focusing on first-time buyers.
Will you bring in more construction workers?
Well, we have a demand-driven migration system. In the last year, we brought about 10,000 workers into the country who have construction skills, and I'd imagine the numbers will continue along those lines.
So not an increase?
Well, sorry, David, the migration system doesn't work that way. The government doesn't set how many construction workers come in each year. It's a demand-driven system that brought in 10,000 places last year.
Let's look at the Liberals' plan today. I appreciate this is breaking news. Jacob Greber just brought us the story a little earlier. We're yet to see all the details. But what do you think of the idea of letting first-home buyers deduct from their tax their mortgage interest payments for 5 years on a newly built home?
David, I think it's a bit early for me to comment on it. I haven't seen anything on this proposal other than the fact that it seems to have emerged and perhaps not gone through a proper shadow cabinet process. Look, I think what we've seen today is public policy on the run for a campaign on the slide here. And, it's been chaotic. The opposition's changed their position on critical elements of their policy from day to day. So let's see if this is still their policy by the end of the week. Maybe then we'll take it seriously.
OK, but as a housing minister, have you ever thought of this idea, looked at this idea?
Look, the problem that we have in housing Australians today is that we're not building enough homes quickly enough, and really the serious answer to this is fixing that problem.
But if you look at this idea,
and that's where you see our $43 billion investment in trying to build more homes around our country.
I'm just asking whether you haven't criticised this idea. I've noticed. Have you ever thought about it?
Sorry, David. All I know about this is that it's come out this morning, so I think it's a bit unfair for me to have a highly considered opinion about what's gone on. Yeah. It's not something that we've looked at. Our focus is on the actual fix of the problem here, and the actual fix, whatever you want to say about it, is that we need to build more homes more quickly. We have a $43 billion plan on the table, which is building more homes, getting renters a better deal, and getting more Australians into home ownership. And my message to you today is we've got a lot more work to do in a second term with these game-changing reforms to help first home buyers.
I'll just try one more time though. Are you critical at all of the idea of mortgage deductions for first home buyers?
Well, I mean, a couple of things I'd just say. We're probably talking about a pretty small segment of the market here, only first home buyers who are only buying into what are actually quite expensive new builds. But we need to look at the numbers here and understand what it is the coalition's proposing. One thing I just will say is that we've got to help young people get into home ownership, and I'm not sure how this policy is going to assist us to do that. The difficulty they're facing is saving a deposit, and that's why our 5% deposit for first homeowners across the country is such a game-changing thing for young people.
And on the tax break that Peter Dutton will promise today for low and middle income earners, you have a modest tax cut, but that applies to everyone, even on high incomes. His is more squarely targeted at, I guess, the sort of people you represent in your electorate. Do you think it will have appeal?
Well, look, I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, the Liberals were crowing about fiscal responsibility, and now they've put forward something which is going to cost $10 billion to give 1 year's worth of relief. I mean, only the Liberals could come up with something that is such a short-term support at such a cost to the community. And I just say I think you've got two really competing things that are demonstrating the choice at this election. We've got one party here that's building Australia's future, tackling the biggest social and economic problems that we face, and another that's going to provide short-term relief just for a year. And don't forget, they're going to raise your taxes after that. So I don't think it's going to have much truck.
Housing Minister Clare O'Neil, appreciate you joining us with some breaking news and a big day for your portfolio. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, David. Appreciate it.
All right, coming up, I'll be talking to the independent member for Kooyong, Monique Ryan, a little later as well. Let's get back to the panel, though. There's some thoughts on all of that. Patricia Karvelas, James Massola, Michael Stutchbury. Just on Labor's policy, PK, I think we did get a bit more detail there around how this will work, particularly, and as I said, the more significant element, which is this government entering the private market in terms of property development. What did you think of that?
Look, I still think there are more details that will have to emerge about exactly how that works. I think you were right to ask about government built versus private sector. The other part is...
Particularly if they're undercutting or they're cheaper than what the private sector's providing.
Yeah, that's right. And getting in the queue is really, you just want to get in the front of the queue to try and get, the approvals to get into this scheme. I think housing demand, there is so much demand that I don't think that does much to sort of stop those other houses get sold, quite frankly. I don't think we're going to have that problem yet. I think the smartest thing that I heard from Clare O'Neil was to still focus on the offer of the actual supply. It is still the biggest problem.
Correct.
The demand side changes that the coalition will unveil clearly today, but also the other part of the Labor promise. They actually don't tackle the fundamental problem, which is we do not have enough houses. And so I reckon they're on a winner in terms of trying to provide more housing, but we still don't have enough workers to actually do it. So the question about skills is a really key one.
The thing is with housing, Stutch, there is no silver bullet, right? It does require all sorts of things to be done, and Labor does like to say that it is doing a whole lot of different things, social housing, and now this somewhat radical move of getting into the private construction market.
Yeah, it's proven very difficult to significantly increase the supply of houses, particularly retrofitting them into big cities. This, as I understand it, is aimed at the middle ring suburbs of like Melbourne and Sydney, for example, of medium density housing, so probably like townhouses. And one of the problems with the housing supply is that costs in Australia have gone up so much. For builders, building a new home, a new house, ends up costing more than the price of established housing. So that's why a lot of them are going broke. And what this is aiming to do is to sort of wedge in there, it's the feasibility gap, I think I've heard it called, where the government's coming in, really subsidising some of that, taking maybe an equity of the overall project. As the Minister says, it's building companies building it, but the government comes in there and in effect subsidises or takes an equity stake of which they can exit at some stage, I think, and given the housing prices.
And I guess they, James, have more levers to pull with the state and territory governments about the land release and the zoning and planning approvals that are required to speed things up.
Yeah, look, that's right. I was just sitting here thinking about what the Minister had said there, David. I had a couple of thoughts. First of all, it feels like we've been arguing about this topic for at least 2 decades, since at least Tanya Plibersek was housing minister under Kevin Rudd back in 2007. We keep having the same arguments. We need more supply. How do we get the deposit? These sorts of things. I think what the competing pitch or clash will ultimately come down to here is Labor saying, we can get you into a house with a 5% deposit, which for so many first home buyers is hard to get that first deposit, versus if you get there, we'll let you deduct your mortgage. Now, of course, that policy will play or sort of link in, if you like, perhaps pretty well with the Coalition's access policy to allow young people access to their super. So that maybe solves that problem for the Coalition on the deposit side, but it feels like we're sort of seeing government subsidy piled on top of government subsidy, piled on top of government assistance, but to PK's point, to Michael's point, we keep coming back to supply.
Yeah, no, exactly.
One other thing I'd pick up, just on the Minister then saying there's about 110,000 people who are first home buyers each year. If they all of them use the Coalition's policy, they reckon that's about $11,000 a year in tax deductions.
Up to, yeah.
Yeah, the back of the envelope, if everyone access it, is about $1.2 billion a year cost to the federal budget, $6 billion over 5. So not actually as much as we might initially think.
Yeah. And one of the constraints has been the supply of labour of construction. You just can't get enough tradies to build these things. And part of the reason for that, in turn, is they've been building all these massive infrastructure projects that state governments have been doing. So that's crowded out, if you like, the housing construction industry. So like the suburban rail loop in Melbourne.
Oh, yes, that popular project.
We've been on air. We've been on air for about 47 minutes. We haven't mentioned Donald Trump.
That's a record.
What a relief. We're so tired of that man.
No, we're not, VK. Let's talk about him, because he has been overshadowing week 2 of this campaign as well. Nobody's missed what's been going on in the markets. The tariffs on again, off again. And what's the latest this morning, Stutch, about, because at the end of the week we were left with extremely high tariffs between China and the United States on each other. There's been a bit of movement today.
Yeah, the thing today is that Trump has exempted really smartphones and some computers and chips from his 145% tariff.
Why has he done that?
China. Well, he's done that really because that would hurt him, and it'd hurt American consumers. It'd put more pain on him, because the Apple iPhone is made as it's a classic globalisation product, of which a lot of it gets made in China.
And I'm sure his big tech bro buddies aren't unhappy either. But they've got a bit of a break.
And Apple's, for Apple and so forth. Yeah. But I think what this is it's been one of the most incredible weeks we've seen on global financial markets and in global trade policy and the economy sort of ever seen. And Trump had to putting on, and at the end of it, he's had to blink with his big tariffs that he's put on everybody, and put them a lot on pause for 90 days. And that's largely because even though the share market was tanking, the bigger problem there was the bond market was tanking. Now, it gets a bit techie, but the American people, the world's biggest debtors. The US has got a federal government debt of depending on what you rope into it, like $37 trillion.
It's just, yeah.
They have to finance it. When you get a financial shock like that, usually if the share market falls, the bond market, people buy bonds as a safe haven. Mm. What this was doing, and what people like Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan were warning, and Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, telling Trump, this is really threatening to break what is the fundamental trust in the US financial system and the status of the dollar, because the US Treasury bonds, like the 10-year bond, is really the heart of the global financial system.
And what happens if that trust is broken? We've never really been there before.
If that breaks, then it'll probably cause all sorts of shockwaves through the financial system, a bit like, in its own way, a GFC. You're never quite sure where it would go to. And it means a big loss while Trump is breaking up the global financial system, global trading system. It could really damage America's central role of being at the centre of the global financial system.
So that's why he paused the tariffs on most of the world and will reduce them to a 10% base. We'll get to what that means for Australia and so on. But he kept in place, apart from these exemptions today on the tech stuff, the tariffs on China, and China ratcheted up their taraffs on the United States. They're both now sitting at over 100%.
And I think what this shows is that was always about China.
So look, Trump is saying that, well, he's indicating that he's keen for a chat with Xi Jinping, but he's also talking tough.
President Xi is one of the very smart people of the world, and I don't think he'd allow that to happen. And we're very powerful. This country is very powerful. Let me tell you, it's far more powerful than people understand. We have weaponry that nobody has any idea what it is, and it is the most powerful weapons in the world.
The weaponry, it's a little concerning when you hear that sort of language.
Well, it's a trade war with a threat of a real war, isn't it?
I don't know how else to interpret that.
Well,
and
it's
for
the only way to
Australia,
interpret it.
for Australia, that of course is the big worry. But even a trade war between our biggest trading partner, China, and our biggest security ally, the United States, it's a nightmare.
Well, it is, and it is actually worrying that our domestic political debate has been so obsessively focused on any deals we could get for our own tariff, the 10%, and then, of course, there's still an aluminium one as well, when in fact the trade war with China is the thing that threatens our economy in the most substantial way. So it's like we're having, I know it's what we can control because we can negotiate it, but seriously, it borders on the ludicrous, doesn't it? That we are now in a situation where that trade war is the one that will affect our growth, it'll affect our jobs, it'll affect everything we do, what we can export to China if their economy shrinks.
Well, you see that this is the effect from the US. The tariffs on us are small because we only 5% of our exports go to the US. It's the China thing. One, does it hit the Chinese economy? But I think in big geopolitical terms, this will really put pressure on Australia. Our biggest export market is China. Our military ally is the US. This will force us more and more to choose between. Both sides will put pressure on us to choose between the Chinese.
So you're saying we can't continue in this happy situation where one is our great trading partner, we keep going there, and the other is our great security ally.
It makes it harder and harder to do because you're almost getting a bit of decoupling of trade. Trump is trying to surround, as he says, China and get the rest of the world, even Japan and Korea, he's doing deals with them at the moment, and he's trying to put the rest of the world to put pressure on China because China is being seen as it's the world's biggest exporter. Yeah. The nature of their economic model is what the Americans are trying to break. But we make all their money out of exporting to China.
But I think you're exactly right about how this gets harder and harder. But what we did see this week on the campaign here, James, was both, for all their arguments about, there'd be a recession under that mob and you'd be better off under us. For all of that, both Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese are saying no to Trump, we're not going to join in putting tariffs on China, and they're saying no to Xi Jinping, we're not going to put tariffs on the United States. We want to try and keep this happy situation going.
Yeah, look, both sides of politics have walked what has become an increasingly thin and precarious line for decades here, David, going back to at least John Howard, as China became an increasingly consequential and important trading partner. To Michael's point, I do wonder how much longer we'll be able to successfully manoeuvre our way, dance through the raindrops, as it were.
Difficult.
On the decision we've heard about overnight in terms of allowing Chinese tech imports, American products but made in China, back into the US, I don't think this costs Trump much, because we've seen certainly Apple, for example, tooling up in India, looking to go from, say, 20% of iPhones through to 60% being made in India that are going to the US. So it doesn't cost him too much. And I'm also not sure that these phone-making jobs, if you like, that they're the ones that Donald Trump wants to bring back. About a decade ago, Apple decided to make its newest and fanciest MacBook in Texas. They got the factory built, they almost got there, and they went, oh, hang on, there's one screw that we need, a hex screw, that's only made in one factory in China. There was no way to disentangle
this is the
from that
reality
supply
chain. Kind of jobs that Americans want too. And do Americans want to be making iPhones, right? Clearly they're a services economy. They've moved away from those sorts of jobs.
Yeah, they're going to make the Nike shoes and so on. Anyway.
You see it affecting the campaign. The Port of Darwin decision this week, which both sides fell over themselves to reverse the decision that allow a Chinese company, Landbridge, to lease long-term the Port of Darwin. And you'll see this go back and forward as the two sides seek advantage over the Chinese relationship and the US relationship. And of course, the fact that Donald Trump has become so unpopular has been a large part of why Labor has been able to put pressure on Dutton, and he hasn't been. You've seen it in Canada as well.
Yeah.
He hasn't been able to have a clear swipe at the government over this.
Yeah, just quickly, we've got to keep moving. But
I think that's right. But I thought that was a good moment for the Prime Minister this week, actually, when this was all raised, and he said, "See, that's why we've got to be, cool our jets." Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but because look how he backs down. Look how quickly things change, and it's a really compelling argument to the argument that Peter Dutton was making, which is go make a deal straight away. It's kind of like, hang on a minute, these people are rather confused about what they're doing.
I think we need a 2-hour show the way things are.
Let's campaign for it.
Time to talk to the independent member for Kooyong now, Monique Ryan, and to take us there, here was the leader of the Greens warning about the dangers of Donald Trump.
There are millions of us in this country at the moment who do not believe in what Donald Trump is doing and do not believe in what Peter Dutton is doing. And this election is an incredible chance to say, like, we say no to that big loser energy that's coming out of the White House, and we want us to be a country where everyone is able to afford the basics and where we are not joined at the hip to Donald Trump the next time he decides to go and press the nuclear codes and go to war.
Monique Ryan, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David. Nice to be with you.
There's a bit going on this morning. We'll get to some of the policy announcements, but just on Donald Trump, are you on the same page as the Greens when it comes to these concerns?
Well, I wouldn't be using the sort of language that Adam Bandt's using about Donald Trump. I don't think that's helpful. I think that sort of undergraduate populism doesn't really sit well with electorates like Kooyong. But I do have to say that I am hearing on the streets of Kooyong every day about people's concerns, both about trade alliances with the US, but also the potential for issues with AUKUS and our defence alliances as well. And they are things which are very much front of mind in electorates like mine.
You did join calls this week for a parliamentary inquiry into AUKUS. Why?
Well, I think that what we've seen in the unpredictability and chaotic nature of global politics in the last few months is a call really for all of us to look at our positioning as a nation and to think about the fact that the US might not always be, it's obviously a defence partner of our most important defence partner since 1940, but it might not always be a country which works to act in our best interest, both on trade and on defence. And I think it is time for us to think about diversifying our interests as a country to build our resilience. And that's something that the major parties have been loth to speak to in recent times. What we've seen is that you couldn't put an envelope between them in their rush to be non-partisan on AUKUS and the like. But many people in electorates like Kooyong are concerned that we will never see the Virginia submarines and that we are wasting potentially $400 billion or more on a partnership which won't pay off in the way that we need it to down the track. And so they're asking, well, reasonably, I think, what are the other options and what else should we be thinking about?
Do you also have similar concerns or even greater concerns about Xi Jinping, China's president? And do you think we need some way of maintaining our national security?
Well, I think we do. Of course, we need national security, and everyone's very concerned about that. And the questions they are asking us are we best positioned to defend ourselves against potential threats down the track? Are we best positioned in doing that by putting all of our $400 billion or more into the AUKUS partnership, or should we be looking at other options as well?
Are you worried about Xi Jinping too?
I think we're all worried about the potential geopolitical situation, both in terms of trade and defence. And that's why we need to diversify potentially, or just think about other options available to us as an island nation, which is a long way from the US and whose interests are not always 100% allied with those of the US.
Let's turn to some of the domestic matters. Starting on tax, Peter Dutton today at his campaign launch is going to promise a one-off tax break up to $1,200 for low and middle income earners. Do you support that?
Look, it's really frustrating to see that Peter Dutton 2 weeks ago said that he had no interest in further tax cuts, and our understanding is that the Shadow Expenditure Review Committee has pretty much put that off the table a couple of weeks ago. Australians are struggling with the cost of living crisis. They're doing it tough, and they could probably do with some short-term cash. But what we're talking about with Peter Dutton's plan is a one-off sugar hit, which, let's face it, is the desperate act of someone whose electoral campaign is tanking and who's looking for some cheap votes.
So would you vote against it?
I don't think it would be in the best interest of our country to give everyone a one-off sugar hit tax cut at this point in time. We know that that would be inflationary. He's talking about putting $10 billion into the economy over a 12-month period. Australians are telling me that they're struggling with cost of living pressures. People are telling me that they really would like some interest rate cuts. The 3 interest rate cuts that we're expecting over the rest of this 12-month period would be put in jeopardy as a result of Peter Dutton's tax cuts.
But this wouldn't apply until mid-2026.
Well, I think the RBA and other economic institutions would be looking at the potential impact of these tax cuts, where we would be looking to factor them into our economy.
When it comes to tax reform generally, is there one specific thing you'd like to see?
I hear every day in Kooyong from young people that they don't think they're ever going to be able to afford a home of their own unless they can benefit from intergenerational wealth transfer from their parents, from the bank of mum or dad. So I think that when we look at tax reform, what we need is mature, visionary, well thought out, pragmatic tax reform, which will look at home availability and affordability for all Australians over the next generation. We haven't seen that from either of the political parties in this electoral campaign to date.
So would you like to see those investor tax breaks, negative gearing, capital gains tax breaks wound back?
I think we need to look at every aspect of our tax system to improve housing affordability for Australians. And so, people like yourself, Dave, will always ask me, well, what about this, what about this, what about this? Every lever needs to be on the table to improve housing affordability in this country, because it's a crisis 3 decades in the making for which neither of the major parties has to this point offered us adequate plans.
No, I hear what you're saying, but equally, saying we support tax reform is a lot easier than saying, well, here's one thing I actually believe in that I'd like to see changed. Are you able to say whether you want to see the negative gearing rules changed?
I think that we need to look at all of the rules around tax, both at a federal and a state level, to see whether or not they're fit for purpose at this point in time. One of the things I've been hearing about every day for the last 4 weeks is Victorians' frustration with land tax, with the somewhat capricious land tax that the Victorian state government has levied in the last couple of years. And the problem is that the way that that feeds into the federal tax system has been unexpected and really unpleasant for many people. We need the federal and state governments to be working together on these issues, not at odds with each other.
What about the housing policies that we'll hear today from both sides, starting with Labor's idea, making the first home buyers guarantee more widely available, where you only need a 5% deposit, and then investing in 100,000 new homes for first home buyers. Do you like that idea?
Well, I'm hearing from first home buyers, or potential first home buyers, that they've been looking for help. We've been hearing that for 3 years, and so I think that policies that will advance that for young Australians in particular are welcome. I think actually the most important part of the policy platform that Labor's rolled out overnight is the 100,000 new homes, because it seems clear that supply is the major problem in the housing market, and it's been the sticking point for making houses more affordable in general.
And what about Peter Dutton's idea that he'll announce today of interest deductions against your income tax for new home buyers?
Yeah, so it's an interesting piece, but the problem is it does not address the issue of supply to any significant extent. And there's a lot of unknown detail about this. Changes to the way that mortgages are considered under our tax system will then would have to feed into questions about how capital gains tax will be applied to those homes. And we don't have any detail about that, nor do we have any detail from the opposition as yet about the cost of this policy.
When you mention supply, the need for more supply, you have expressed some concern about high-rise developments in parts of your electorate, like Toorak. Do you support more high-density living in your seat?
I think densification is one of the most important parts of the housing problem in Australia, and everyone in Kooyong understands that we need more housing. We've had quite a bit of densification by proxy in recent years, but what the Victorian state government has put up is 25 activity centre plans, which would allow things like 3 to 6 storey developments in suburbs like Toorak and Hawthorn, where I live, where there are heritage overlays. And the Victorian State Government hasn't undertaken the consultation required to get the community to come along with these programs. There's a lot of uncertainty about the impact of the densification that the state government is planning on things like traffic, on roads, on sewerage, on aged care, on childcare, on primary and secondary schools, which the Victorian State Government has not spoken to, and its consultation process has been very poor.
On energy policy, Peter Dutton is promising to get more Australian gas kept in Australia through this East Coast gas reservation. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think many people have felt in the past that the East Coast has missed out. We've seen that the West Australia's had a gas reservation policy since 2006, and their gas is a lot cheaper than ours. But we also have the situation where 82% of the gas that comes off the east coast of Australia is exported. We only use 4.2% of that in the eastern states. And so the problem is not that we have a gas shortage. We don't. The problem is that we have a gas export issue where markets like Korea, China and Japan are paying much, much less for our gas than those of us on the East Coast are. We're being ripped off. So really what we do need a policy by which those people in the East Coast can access gas at the very least at the same prices as international neighbours. But I'm not sure that the gas reservation policy that that Mr Dutton has proposed. We don't have a whole lot of detail about it. There are some constitutional concerns about how it might work, and the reality is that, you know, what we really need to do to bring energy prices down is to get off gas and to get off polluting fossil fuels and move more effectively towards renewables.
I want to ask you about a couple of campaign issues. Your fellow independent MP, Allegra Spender, has admitted that she's been paying social media content creator to make videos talking about, you know, the great things that she's doing. Are you doing this as well?
I'm not, but having said that, I do have someone who works with me who is my media advisor, and she makes social media content. The reality is that young people these days, I hate to break this to you, don't watch Insiders and they don't read the papers. They get their news off social media, and I think it's really important, as I have the youngest electorate in Victoria, that I engage effectively and well with the young people in my electorate, and I do that through social media to a significant extent.
I guess the difference is politicians aren't paying us or the newspapers to, you know, write about them. Here you're talking about a politician.
Some of us would argue about that, actually, David. But
what would you argue?
Well, I would argue that some of the right-wing press in this country should come with a verification from the Liberal Party, because I do think that much of what is put into the press, and the right-wing press in particular, has been fed to it by my political opponents.
Well, OK, but we're talking about actually paying for content. Do you have a problem with that?
Look, I think we pay to generate the content that we're putting in front of the voters. I'm not sure that there's a big issue there.
But should it be clear to voters, people who are looking at this content, that it's paid for by the politician?
Look, I don't really have an opinion on it.
Really?
I think, well...
You don't think voters deserve to know that if someone they're watching is saying great things about a politician, whether they're being paid by that politician?
Look, I'll have to give it some thought. It's not something I've given great thought to myself. Obviously, I haven't engaged in anything like that myself.
You'd have to give that some thought.
Well, I would think that it would be clear. I don't know. I think I'd have to give it some thought, David.
So you might be all right with politicians paying for content that voters have no idea money's changing hands?
Well, I think that's potentially been happening for a long time. If you look at the cartoons that Pauline Hanson's been putting on the social media for years now, which are very clearly politically biased.
But they're One Nation cartoons, aren't they?
I'm not sure that that is the case, actually. I think it's an interesting question. I think media diversity and the way that our media works in this country is something which would certainly merit greater examination, and something that we could talk about. OK, I'll move on.
Your husband, of course, famously apologised for being caught on camera removing signs from your Liberal opponent, Amelia Hamer. One sign. What was he thinking? Have you got to the bottom of it?
Oh, look, it was an unfortunate episode. It shouldn't have happened. You know, we all make mistakes in the heat of the moment. It was a one-off. We've apologised.
Okay, and finally, if we do get a hung parliament at this election, the inevitable question, what are you going to do? I'm interested in how you approach the decision on which side you might back.
Well, it's been a bit difficult to date, David, because as we're seeing even today, the major parties are bringing out policies on the fly. We're less than 3 weeks from the election and the opposition has just launched its first ever significant housing policy. What I would do in the event of being re-elected and neither major party being able to form government would be to, and them asking me for their assistance in guaranteeing confidence and supply, was that I would sit down with them and try and determine which of them were best placed to provide the sort of mature, well thought out policy area that the people of Kooyong have told me that they want. We haven't seen that to date, and it's been frustrating, I think, for communities like mine, where we don't know what the major parties are necessarily going to be offering to them, particularly the opposition. But I would meet with both the leaders of both parties, whoever that might be, and try to come to a position that would best reflect the values of the people of Kooyong.
I mean, Peter Dutton has a go at you quite regularly. He calls you a Green. Would you really be willing to support him to be Prime Minister?
I would support whichever major leader was able to provide those policies which are best in keeping with the values and the desires of the people of Kooyong.
Monique Ryan, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
All right, coming up, we're going to look at the work from home backflip from the coalition today, this week as well. Let's get back to our panel. Patricia Karvelas, James Massola, Michael Stutchbury. PK was on your show the other day on Afternoon Briefing that Allegra Spender did admit that some content from a social media content provider was paid for. The content does say at the end, made in collaboration with Climate 200. Is that clear enough to...
In fact, her office has just been in touch. You won't be surprised, but there's a lot of sensitivities around all of this. They say it is disclosed that it's made in collaboration. And so that's what they say, and she did admit it, as you say. By the way, I was surprised that Monique Ryan couldn't clarify what she thought about that, because it has been in the media, but also she doesn't do it. She obviously, I'm thinking, didn't really want to criticise Allegra Spender. That's the sense I got there. I get it. I get the point they make, by the way. I think it's a really important point. I too wish everyone was watching Insiders who was under 30. I really do. And I think actually some people are, so I don't think there's no one. But they are digital natives. My kids are, your kids are. Like,
no, I get that. I get that. That's not the issue. I think the issue is...
the transparency. Yeah. And I don't think it is transparent.
Wherever you're watching content and, you know, great. If young people are engaging with politics through social media content creators, that's terrific. That gets them engaged in politics.
But do they paid?
Do they need to know, and is it clear enough by putting a tag at the end saying made in collaboration with, that it's paid content? The politician is actually paying for someone to say nice things.
Yeah, I think it's not clear, sufficiently clear at all with that Allegra Spender content. To Monique Ryan's point, the Pauline Hanson sort of mini movies or whatever they are, they're quite clearly disclosed. I just thought that was bizarre, David. Like, cash for comments, fine if it's a Teal, but if it's, you know, an Alan Jones or a David Spears or a Ben Fordham and they get up and say, you know, buy Valvoline, that's got to be disclosed. Like, what's the difference? I mean, was she serious there?
It's a murky world. Did Labor assist the social media influencers to come up to Canberra for the budget coverage?
Some weren't.
So it's, you know, this is a murky world, and social media is part of the world of identity of culture, which now grips politics.
Yeah, and the PM's office, to be fair...
It needs... Sorry, no. It needs clarity.
Yeah, it does. The PM's
office
because
it's a new area.
Those influencers,
exactly.
Some of them are...
But we can't... I think one of the arguments Allegra Spender was making, though, and I think this is an interesting one of nuance, is that, yeah, they pay them, but they have a worldview which aligns there as well, right?
Yeah, and look, to be clear, I have no problem with... you know, using social media in these ways and accessing politics via social media is terrific. It's just the transparency. If a Polly's paying for someone to say nice things, the viewer needs to know, I think. Anyway.
We should know everything is the truth.
Almost certainly someone on social media is already clipping this up to say we're a bunch of dinosaurs.
I know. To be clear, no problem at all. And there's some terrific content makers out there. There really are, who are just bringing politics to life. They're cutting through. But if they're, money's going in their pocket, that's the issue. Now, back to the policy debate. The gas reservation idea we mentioned there, and it sounded like Monique Ryan was certainly open to having more Aussie gas kept in Australia. We did finally see the modelling on the Coalition's plans this week. This is the modelling that was done by Danny Price from Frontier Economics. I caught up with him for the podcast this week and went through, his numbers and how it all works. And he did acknowledge that he's had a bit of blowback from the gas industry over this.
I've had a number of gas producers ring me to let me know what they think about this, because of course this means that they get less profit.
Yeah, what were some of those calls like?
Well, a lot of them are our clients, so they're pretty dark about it, of course. But kind of bad luck. As I say, they could have fixed this problem themselves. They chose not to.
You can watch that full conversation with the QR codes there. Stutch, industry's not happy. The gas companies don't like the idea of selling gas at a cheaper price.
I think the fundamental issue here is that Australia has put limits on supply of new gas overall. Particularly Labor has not been conducive to having gas in the mix. So you had generally a pushback on expanding gas supplies. Now, you could have had Narrabri in New South Wales up by now. Victorian government has basically banned exploration of gas. So now we've got in a bit of a jam, and we're doing something which is going in, and a coalition government is both pro-gas, but it's also intervening in the market. So you've got more interventions forcing a gas which would go to the export market. And contrary to what Monique Ryan said, I think you get more money exporting to gas. They pay higher prices in Japan and Korea, and they're trying to separate the export market price from the domestic price here. I think some of the problems with this intervention is it's more interventions into a market, and it can have the effect of reducing supply again, because to get all that gas out, you've got to constantly drill all these gas seams up in Queensland. It costs money, and if you're forcing the price down from the $14 a petajoule down to the $10 a petajoule, you're reducing the returns. Will they keep on producing that uncommitted gas? That's a question mark, and often you need the gas quickly, and there's a limit on how much that can go through the pipeline.
Danny Price's argument was they're still making plenty of profit, right? A lot of these projects were developed, he reckons, based on a $7 or $8 a gigajoule price. They're still going to, if they get $10, they're still doing pretty well. Maybe not the higher profit they're
I think they're going to do all right.
In the early days of the Labor government, when Ed Husic and Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese were starting to grapple with this problem, and when we'd seen the start of the Ukraine war, what we saw was the price per gigajoule of gas going from about $4 to $6 up to about $24. Now, what Labor did a bit over 2 years ago, capped it at about $12 a gigajoule, the price, and that's for about 2% of the gas that's being produced here to stay here to be sold at a lower price than the 24. So $12 a gigajoule, selling that into the market, 2% of their gas, that's still double the price that's being reaped compared to the usual long-term price, and it's also half the price of the international export price. So there's room to move here. These gas producers are not struggling to make a profit.
Bottom line, the modelling shows we're not going to see a huge difference in our energy bills, but gas prices would be, according to Danny Price, about 7% lower for the household, 15% lower for industry, and that's something. And it's interesting, PK, that Labor's response to all of this has been a little careful.
It has been. It's more about whether the coalition can deliver rather than the policy itself.
Do you think there are some in Labor who might like the idea?
Well, I interviewed, for instance, the Industry Minister, Ed Husic, who has, as you rightly pointed out, he pushed very hard to go very hard on the gas giants. So you can see why he feels a sense of ownership around trying to force their hand and say they shouldn't be making these levels of profits, particularly for the industrial sector. He was concerned about industry, but he's critical, like, can they, in government, say, they become the government, the coalition, would they stare down the gas giants? Like, that's the question they're trying to put in people's heads rather than the policy.
This is this is a policy, apart from the expanding gas generally, that the Greens and the Australia Institute and the left supports.
Yeah, so the Australian Workers Union for more than a decade.
And the Australian Workers Union. Yeah. So it's...
Well, they also say plenty of coalition supporters. I think it's 71% of coalition supporters like it too.
Yeah. But it's a sort of interventionist measure which may or may not work in actual practice. It's an intervention in the market. It'd be far better if right from the start, from the get-go, we hadn't put these artificial restrictions on supply of gas, and we wouldn't have had the problem now.
But
I want to
I want to pick you up on there, Stutch.
Yep.
The other thing that we should be looking at, and this is what the policy goes to. John Howard said basically the Western Australian gas industry would come to an end in 2006, slight hyperbole, but it was going to be a disaster if WA reserved gas. That has not proven to be the case. It's quite
work from home. We don't see a policy backflip like this mid-campaign terribly often, but it was clear the Coalition didn't want anyone to miss the point that they had dumped this one.
We made a mistake in relation to the work from home policy, and Labor turned that into a scare campaign.
We've listened to feedback from right around the country, not just Canberra-based public servants, but right around the country, who are telling us that flexible work is something that they would like to see enshrined.
Getting the balance right between accountability for every dollar of taxpayers' money is incredibly important, but flexibility matters too in a modern workforce, and so we've adjusted this.
Flexibility matters in policy development too, James. Look, I said you don't see this too often. It was painful but necessary. This was going down terribly. What went wrong here? How did they end up with this?
Look, I think that this started, I think it was March 3 when Jane Hume gave a speech to the Menzies Research Institute. It had been coming through in focus groups run by Labor, run by the Coalition for weeks, that this was a disaster. Now, the Coalition's been saying, oh, no, this never applied to the private sector. Just those lazy or so-called lazy public servants in Canberra, and we'll roll it back anyway. What they're not saying is that the public sector adopting this policy sends a signal to the private sector that it's time for 5 days a week back in the office. That allowed Labor to run riot, and I think what we saw, it was a necessary backflip, but in the scale, we're almost at the real Julia size of a sort of a mid-campaign reset, but it was a necessary one.
I think it's even worse than that one, because the real Julia one was silly for lots of reasons, but this one was a genuine backflip. Like, there was a policy and then there wasn't a policy. The positive, if you can give them one, and it's, is that they, by being so overt about it, they could then also deal with Labor continuing a scare campaign on it by saying, look how upfront, it wasn't just slipped out, owning it.
Saying, at least we admit we're wrong.
Well, it's but the Peter school, I'm so sorry.
Right. Where there's still confusion, though, is the public service cuts.
Well, I think you've got to be agile in this world, of course. But the incredible thing, I think, here is that the Coalition hasn't been able to stick a policy which says when Labor built into the enterprise bargain for Canberra public servants, fat cats, that they can decide to work at home 5 days a week and never, ever come into the office, that they haven't been able to stick that policy.
You reckon they should have toughed this one out?
Well, isn't it like, does anyone really think that the productivity of the federal public service won't be hurt by policies that everybody, whenever they like, can work at home 5 days a week and they never have to come.
Well, I don't know if they're
Are you really serious?
I'm just looking
in the public service that you try managing your staff where no one, and they can decide whenever they want to come in. That we've got to a point now where productivity is falling in the country. We're wanting to give pay rises to people. Actually, we're becoming less productive.
I think the Productivity Commissioner has said the sweet spot is a half-half.
Yeah. Sure, but they've got a policy which says now, entrenched, that the Labor government, by a federal minister, finance minister, who is really the minister for the public service, that's her constituency.
Jason, it is correct that it's about the signal it sends, and for people who are red hot with rage about it, largely women, and Jane Hume said to me the other day on afternoon briefing, she said to me, this wasn't a policy that was meant to be gendered, and I said, well, yeah, but women disproportionately.
Sure, but you can't have a policy. You can't overturn a policy or challenge a policy which has gone to the extreme in the public service. You can't do that. Now, for companies in a competitive, they've got to be productive. They've got to face competition. A lot of them need people in the office. And Chris Minns, the New South Wales Labor Minister, he wants to get people because he realised we need to become.
All right, we've got to move on. Our panel: Michael Stutchbury, James Massola, and Patricia Karvelas back in a moment with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers, Talking Pictures.
I'm photographer Mike Bowers. I'm talking pictures this morning with EP of the Arts, Zoe Norton-Lodge, and a very warm welcome. How's your election?
I mean, it's like the fatigue sets in very, very early for me. Yeah, I imagine it does for you too.
This is my 14th election. So
Well, this is off to a really sad start.
Well, it is, isn't it? Albo did a slip and Dutton did a backflip, and what a spectacular backflip it was. Lovely David MacArthur cartoon.
I mean, I was inspired by this one because I thought, like, look, whoever doesn't win the election will be a shoo-in for Dancing with the Stars.
Or, you know, the next Olympic breakdancing.
Yeah.
That's got a sense of ray gun about it.
Totally.
Fiona Katowska's cartoon, for a successful double backflip, you really got to stick the landing. Yeah.
I mean, this one, he almost looks like he's dressed up as Ray Gun. I mean, that might work. That might be more successful than whatever he's been trying to do before.
Yeah, maybe he should get Ray Gun on the election campaign with him.
I would enjoy that.
I would
that
too.
That would really wake me up.
I did love this David Rowe, who's channeling the working from home, but it's a very crowded working from home because Jane Hume is here and David Littleproud and Angus and Jacinta.
I know. Look at her desperately trying to do his wool is washing up for him, which clearly needs doing.
The back in red mug.
This is why he doesn't like working from home. Look at that.
Look at that. And he's getting hit on the head with a football here.
Yeah.
On second thought, I might work from, oh dear.
Yeah.
Kathy Wilcox, okay, maybe work from home is not so bad after all.
Indeed, if you're lucky enough to still have a job.
Yeah, that's right. Brett Lethbridge campaigning, and the two-word slogan is?
Peter Dutton. Oh, yes, Peter Dutton. But Peter Dutton, and let's not forget Peter Dutton. You will remember the last election, they also had a two-word slogan, Scott Morrison. Scott Morrison. And that worked a bloody treat. It ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. The photos this week look good. You could see that the incumbents have their tails up. You can look, that on Jim can only be described as a kick and grin.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister has been everywhere.
He has. He's not a latte sipping lefty. He's a piccolo
man.
sipping lefty.
Peter Dutton has been photographed holding a hose multiple times this election. He will hold a hose.
He will hold
petrol hose.
He will hold a hose.
He's probably gone on his own route here because there's little people that go out called advances. They walk ahead with a hand up so they don't go near signs like go nuts. He was probably even briefed, don't go near the go nuts sign. Lots of hard hats. I love the way that they put all the travelling media and visiting politicians in blue.
It is a bit of a shame that you could be wearing high vis and still not look very bright, though.
We're in the middle of an election campaign and both sides want to attract the attention of voters, but they keep getting Trump.
It's loud, isn't it? It's a noisy bin fire.
Love the yo-yo that he's playing with. Trump's playing with the yo-yo of the world. Lovely Harry Bruce cartoon.
I love it. It's giving me like cat tangled up with the tampon vibes.
David Rowe's got Godzilla versus King Don.
I feel like I don't want to be critical of Mr. Rowe, but I feel like he has Mr. Trick here though with the penguins. He could have gone with Xi Jinpingu.
Mark Knight's picked up on Mark Warner's spray in one of their committees. He was the former governor of Virginia. Australia is one of America's strongest allies. We share a free trade agreement. We have a trade surplus with Australia. So why do we whack them with a trade tariff?
It's a really good question. Well, I know who I'm voting for in the next election.
Yeah, I'd like to vote for him too. Yeah. You can't vote for US senators.
It's unfortunate, isn't it? I mean, the man has way more cut through than either of our blokes.
So it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. You've made what so far has been a pretty ordinary election campaign seem far brighter. I'll let you do the honours.
Oh, thank you. Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Mike. Now, before we get some final observations, a reminder about the ABC News Leaders Debate. It's happening Wednesday night. Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton are going to be joining me at the ABC's Parramatta studio. We'll be live from 8 p.m. and PK, you're going to be hosting a special late night Insiders straight after it to analyse all that's been said. It's going to be a big test for both leaders. We've had thousands of questions coming in from the ABC Your Say project. Keep sending them in. It is helping us frame what we're going to discuss in this debate. And I want to make sure that we do focus on the issues that really matter to voters and the future of the country. So put a diary alert in your phone right now for the Leaders Debate on Wednesday night. Let's get some final observations. Stutch.
Yeah, in a lighter vein, some constructive advice from the couch for Jim Chalmers and Angus Taylor following their Treasurers debate on Sky News during the week. I think at 7:30 at night, the Treasurer Jim Chalmers needs to watch out for the 5 o'clock plus shadow, otherwise he'll end up looking like Richard Nixon in the 1960 debate with JFK. On the other hand, Angus Taylor spent most of that debate with one of his hands in his pockets. It looks like he was lounging his way through the debate. He needs to take both hands out of his pockets so they can go on the steering wheel and steer the economy through.
You're on the big stuff, I can tell.
Hot
from the sartorial
Keep
splendour.
your hands out of your pockets.
Exactly.
Is my
James.
arm all right here?
I look too relaxed?
You're looking good.
More of a prediction. Sport and politics can be brutal, and I'm going to make a double-barrel prediction. Simon Goodwin to be gone as Melbourne coach by the end of the year. But more crucially to this show, Milton Dick, well-regarded member for Oxley, an excellent speaker, much like his predecessor, Tony Smith. I have been told by both sides of politics there are advanced discussions underway with a couple of senior crossbenchers about them stepping into Milton Dick's role in the event, which I think is still most likely of a hung parliament.
Who would be the...
I couldn't possibly say, David.
That's interesting. PK.
Just want to say, we found out about a plot against Peter Dutton the other day. The Prime Minister said there had been a threat to him too. And then Julian Hill, who is a gay MP in the Labor Party, there were these banners in the southeast of Melbourne which were extremely homophobic. Clearly they'd been printed, like it wouldn't be hard to find out. Police are onto it. But I just think the tone is revolting, that people have threats to their lives running for office and their sexuality, religion, anything being played into. I just think that it's worth calling it out, that that sort of stuff is deeply unacceptable in our politics.
No, well said. Thank you all for joining us this morning. PK, don't go too far away.
I'm not leaving.
Because you and I are going to take a quick break. We'll be back on the news channel in half an hour for coverage through the day of the 2 campaign launches. There's going to be lots to come. Finally, we showed you Peter Dutton's effort with a footy last week. Well, camera operators beware. It's turning into a trend. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
I say this to you as a bit of advice, Premier, don't go near a football because we've seen politicians try this, do this and not get away with it. You know what? Give him a football. Let's have a go. You can turn this around.
Oh, wow. Oh, no, what are you doing? What's the ask?
Now, are you going for the cameraman? What?
He's going to try and hit the cameraman. Right, off you go.
You're about
Give
to
it
see,
a go. Yep.
You're about to see it. You're about to see a famous double-handed ball drop. Here we go.
All right, let's see how he goes.
He's
done it! He's taken out the cameraman.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.